What we'll do first is make sure that everyone has read the emergency procedures, ensuring that your cell phones are also turned off to silent. We'll now move on to our opening karakia. Please feel free to join in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. First off, apologies. Just noting that Councillor Edwards has tried to join us online. The technology is not working, so I'm going to move apologies for him if he cannot rejoin. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Shaw. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. We have no public comment. Moving on to number 4, presentation from Te Ara Whakamoa. Welcome up Bruce and Kaz. So as discussed earlier, welcome to you both. I'm going to pass it over to you shortly to update the committee on Te Ara Whakamoa and its intentions going forward. There may be some questions from members once you're finished presenting, so please remain seated. Over to you, Bruce.
Thanks very much. Yeah, our presentation is a very grand word. We're just going to give you a quick update on where we've got to and events that have happened in the last couple of weeks. We'll be brief. Our progress to date has been very limited. The good news is that we now seem to have set ourselves up to make some better progress in the pathways, in the world of the pathways document. When I look back for a minute, the pathways report was launched in March 22, and it aimed to set out the why, the what and the how for future Lower Hutt community climate action, and was to be used as a regularly updated information base for those actions. And the group which had helped develop it reformed to lead the process and also aiming to take some specific actions which had been seen as potentially effective contributions. So from July 22, we met about 2 monthly, but for various reasons and misfires, never really got beyond discussion to action. The first actual related output after the Pathways document was done independently by Jörn, the update he gave the committee in September on where the actions named in the Pathways guide had got to. And this kind of galvanised us as a group into thinking harder about what were we doing and trying to achieve. And the first step was reaching agreement with the council that they would provide some funding, $20,000 to start with, and we would take over the secretarial and coordination functions and try and make a go of it from inside the group. The second step was to reset ourselves and get started. And we met 4 times between last December and June, developed and began a cyclical process of updating the document, building on Jörn's work. We explored possible approaches to mobilising more citizens to take more climate action. And 10 days ago, on Friday the 21st of June, we had our make or break meeting, as we'd agreed in December. We considered possible options, and one option was to basically disband and say to the council, make whatever use of the document you choose in the future. And we did seriously consider that. Luckily not for long. We did decide to continue. We made the following key decisions at that meeting. For now, we are developing a much tighter focus on, in our language, informing and communicating. We'll continue 2 things we've already started, which is one, the cyclical updating of what's going on, and adding to that, working on how we communicate it to what audiences. Secondly, we are planning to hold, probably by the end of July, but certainly soon, a second hui with the environmental groups in the Hutt area to refresh our relationship with them and to work on things of common interest. And we're going to take 2 new actions. One is setting up regular public information sessions using credible and well-known presenters. The first will be in about 2 months, and they'll probably continue at about 2 monthly intervals for now, to start with. They will be consciously linked to Te Ara Whakamoa and to the pathway and its updates. So that's the one new action, is basically starting public information sessions with the James Rennicks, Judy Lawrences and other people of this world who have some cachet and can keep the word out in front of people. And secondly, to underpin all this, develop a proper communications plan. What channels do we want to use for communicating, how do we get the message out better? The volunteers who now make up our communications group are meeting tomorrow to get started on those 2 new actions, so tomorrow morning, and everything else is in progress. One thing we had planned to do was hire a part-time secretary researcher. We delayed that in the end till after the June meeting because we were very unsure whether we would continue past June, and to give somebody work for a couple of months and to say thank you, goodbye, seemed a little ridiculous to us. We figured we could get there and then hire the person. We will be advertising the position later in the month as soon as we can get it done. And that we're talking about a day a week of somebody doing the updating research and helping coordinate the meetings, basically. And if we are successful in building wider interest and involvement over the next 6 to 12 months, we may look to expand our activities back towards where we initially hoped to, including sponsoring or leading specific actions, developing broader climate mobilisation programs, either developing them or linking with existing programs of that type, like Take the Jump. Anything to add, Kaz?
So Bruce has given a really good summary of kind of where we've been at, and probably some of the key things to mention is, we focused a lot on kind of this idea of informing people, helping to act, and then also mobilising people. And I think at our last meeting we had quite a wrestle with, the scope of the work that needed to be done and matching that up with the capacity and the people in the room, and had a really honest conversation about that. And for us, that was quite a useful thing to gauge, just in terms of, even when we first began this journey, I can't even remember what year that was, given COVID kind of sucked us all into a black hole. But that time when we first began it, we even had the wrestle there of the scope in terms of, how much do we wrestle with mitigation or adaptation? And, this is being very focused on mitigation. And even within that, we can see that there's actually a huge, big scope in that. So as Bruce was saying, we've kind of paired that back to really focusing on that informed stage and actually matching up the skills and capacity with that. And so for us, that's being a lot more, I guess, intentional about how we go about it. And I think the other reflection I have on that is, we've probably focused on what has been the natural progression of that Ara Whakamua document, that climate pathway, and kind of just working internally to kind of wrestle out some of those nuts and bolts, which has led us to this point where we're like, actually, we need to pare back that scope and then focus on some key things to get things across the line and moving again. And yeah, I definitely think there was a hope and energy of, hopefully that will lead us, let's get some of those things and those wins under the table and start focusing externally so we can actually inform the community, get them on board a bit more, and then that will hopefully help move it towards the action and the mobilising that we actually want to see for the city. And I guess, from that, that's probably one thing to flag for the committee itself to consider, in terms of, what is the whole scope when we're talking about climate action, because, in many respects, we haven't even begun to wrestle with or touch things like adaptation, which is going to be a huge challenge for the city. And so, I guess an invitation to think about those things, but also if this is something that you are, personally really passionate and interested about and want to be part of some of those sessions coming up, we would love to hear from you directly. And so, you know where you can find us. You know where you can find me, at least. So, so please be in touch if you want to be part of that journey with us, because we know full well that it needs more than just our little core crew to start with. It actually requires all of us to partake in that action. Kia ora.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Kaz. Any questions from members? Councillor Shaw.
Kia ora, Bruce and Karen, and I'm pleased that you're going to continue in the important work that you're doing. It was interesting, and I'm really happy to see that you're going to be holding regular public information sessions. And I raised this because I was away at the weekend with family, and we had 3 different generations, and it's not hard to ignore the fact that climate change is having quite a big part in what's happening around the world, and so it started a conversation. What was interesting was that there was such a different level of education and understanding across the 3 different generations. So just, I guess it's not a question but a plea, but just to try and incorporate the different levels of understanding. And I think the ones who knew the most information were the teenagers. And then there was my age group that needed a lot more prompting and understanding. So just a plea for that with your information sessions. I think they're a great idea.
Just to quickly respond to that, that is something we literally were just talking about in terms of recognising that we will require, I guess, different levels of kind of interaction because, again, people are at different stages and spaces when it comes to this mahi and this conversation that has to keep going. And, you know, the flip side of that, you know, I'm recognising we've got an incredible range of ward councillors, particularly at this table. And again, some of those events will be quite geographical. And one of the things we're really mindful of is we would love to know from you what would be really pertinent in your local communities, because again, we need to kind of meet people where they are, and we need to be able to have realistic kōrero that actually helps, you know, inform people, but hopefully will lead to action and mobilisation around these issues too. Don't know if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, sorry. Don't know. For us, big conversation about mobilisation a while back, and rule one was, without a doubt, start with people where they are and acknowledge where they are. And if you don't do that, you won't get anywhere. So we have that firmly in mind. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, and thank you. I'm pleased, like Councillor Shaw, that you are going to stick to it, and you've hit on the money with meeting with perhaps ward councillors in their locations. Every community is different, but I think the thing for me is I see too that the education part is the most important. It's the things that are in this report now will be handled if we can educate now to be aware of, and it's just the making aware of over a wider community. So my question is, I know that Eastbourne community went out and just started with their community, where they were, and connected everybody. So I'm sure they're open to, you know, sharing what their model, what they've done. So just to make that start, and I think if you stick with it, and, you know, I'd be encouraging to stick with it, let's get the ball going and rolling. Yeah, so keep it up.
Oh, okay, yeah. Ginny Horrocks is very involved with us when she's back from overseas, and Bruce Spedding has already volunteered to help us out to share those sort of models. Thank you. Yeah.
Any questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Just following up on that, have you also looked across the region, across the country, at some communities that are often a bit ahead of us in their planning and their conversations? Waitaki Beach, for example, I think are quite well ahead of any of us in the Hutt on adaptation kōrero. So, yeah, how much of this do you think is a regional, national, international conversation as well?
From my point of view, from the point of view of talking about Lower Hutt, those would tend to be resources we'd be more interested in drawing in. You know, very aware of people like people in Nelson and various others up and down the country who are doing some interesting work, and the communities. And wherever we can find people who have something to offer, we'd like to bring them in. Hopefully we can offer them something back at some stage as well. But I suspect that might help build some sort of interregional relationships. I don't know how it'll go. Really don't know.
And I guess, you know, there's that dynamic where a number of us as individuals are aware of many different things that are going on, either across the country or internationally as well. And so I think often those kind of feed into our conversations. And I guess one of the key things that we're looking in terms of this environmental hui is almost to gauge some of the stuff that we know that is also locally happening, but we don't often hear much about. So let us invite you to that, because we would love to hear those more local things. And again, that will hopefully be a space that will foster some of those conversations around what else is happening that's beyond us. Because, you know, again, I think each person is aware of different things that are going on, and it's quite a powerful thing when you can get all of that down in one space. And so, you know, we would love to see you at that hui to partake in that.
Fantastic. Once again, thank you to you both for coming in today, but also for your continued work on Te Ara Whakamoa. It's much appreciated by all of the committee. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item 5, conflicts of interest. Anything for members to declare? No. On to item 6, update on Council's climate change mahi. I'm inviting up Yun Schutzer, and members, we're now on page 6 of the order paper. Over to you, Yun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's only a couple of things that I'd like to update the committee on in terms of since the paper was written. One is in terms of contract decarbonisation, there's obviously quite a lot of contracts coming up for procurement, and it's going to be one of the key focus areas for this coming year in terms of really trying to influence how we do procurement and ensuring that we do embed carbon reductions in the contracts. Not just reporting on emissions, which will be one of the drivers to get companies to not just measure the emissions, but also look at, okay, well, how do we get better, but embedding things into the contracts as a result of the procurement. Second part is that the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund, so at least one of those projects is in the process of being delivered, which is really pleasing because it does mean that not only have we completed the funding round, but also the funding is now going there to actually result in action. So it's good to see that, and I really want to push this, that we don't end up in a space where we allocate funding and then 2 years later nothing has been delivered. So the focus is really on getting immediate changes. And then the last item is around the climate change impact assessment. You may have seen there's already been some media coverage on this. Not surprisingly, I guess, because it does, reappear occasionally. I guess just to give you some confidence, we do have work underway to help reduce emissions, and I think that's probably one of the key takeaways for this part is that there's a lot of focus on how do we adjust or how do we adapt to climate impacts, but actually it actually just illustrates the strong need for carbon emission reductions if we want to avoid that additional climate impact that is not already locked in.
Thank you, Ewan. Any questions from members? Mayor Barry.
Thanks, Ewan. Just on the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund, absolutely agree with your point, which was the essence of my question that I was going to ask. Is there some reporting that can come through in regards to the progress when things are completed, and obviously when there are red flags of delays or any other issues? And I suppose also once we've allocated the funding, is there any levers that we have at our end as the funder to ensure that things do move, or how we work with them?
Yeah, so we have got contracts in place with those organisations that have been approved for funding, and so there are some delivery milestones that they have to achieve. With most of them, they're literally within the next 3 to 6 months to get those items delivered. And so I expect at the next committee, which I think will be in September, I should be able to provide a brief update. So it'll probably be a table showing, where things are at and whether something has been completed or not. And for those things that have been implemented, we have conditions in the contract where we say we actually want to work with the party to kind of showcase what they're doing and to use that as learning for other organisations. So it's not just providing the funding and then they make a change, but it's also using that as a way to not just help educate, but demonstrate how change is feasible to other organisations in the Valley.
You also just answered my next question as well. It would be really good to see a communication plan or whatever that looks like to achieve exactly that, and also for us to be able to give this fund more exposure and to get people thinking about different innovative ways. And I'm particularly interested in seeing community organisations or groups come together and put together proposals that fit the criteria that may solve some challenges for them. I'm thinking like sports clubs, for example, coming together around some of their issues. So if we can do that, obviously that helps promote it, helps get the message out there, so we don't sort of just have the same groups applying regularly for this fund.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And one of the couple of things we're planning over the next 2-3 months is to pull together kind of like a workshop, one hopefully with the Chamber of Commerce to target businesses, and another one targeting sports clubs to kind of bring them together, show them what the fund is for, and ideally also bring those in that already are doing some of the projects to kind of share the learnings, and ideally use that as a launching pad to attract other funding bids in the next round.
So you'd be able to report back in the next round just with the work that's been done on that, and yep, Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Mitchell.
You seem to be in the habit today, Ewan, of pre-answering people's questions. I was going to ask you about the business community because there was some talk when this fund was established of trying to reach into the business community so that businesses can model best practice to each other as well. I'm really pleased to see the community sector getting a look in on this first round. I was kind of worried that they might miss out, if anything. So there's some really good projects here, but yeah, just kind of thinking ahead. Is it our intention to try and reach more into the business community in future rounds?
Yes, absolutely. We do want to see a wide spectrum of project proposals and also a wider range of types of projects. So I think this round was quite heavy in terms of electric vehicles, but there are other projects out there that I'm sure people are thinking about, and that could be solar PV, whether it's on sports clubs or business facilities, things like phasing out gas, those sort of things. So there's a wider range of project typologies out there that we kind of haven't really captured yet.
Mayor Barry.
Just around the fleet, I suppose a bit broader than that, around the rubbish and recycling trucks. So where are we at in regards to electrification of that fleet and meeting sort of our
Yes,
targets?
so that's probably the not so good news story at the moment. So originally our timeline was to have the fleet fully electric by 2024, but and over the last few months, in fact over the last year, we have been talking to the contractor about, can we actually achieve this? And one of the challenges is that they've been working to develop a new facility which would be enabled to have the full range of trucks that they would use able to charge now, because there have been delays to developing that facility. That means those delays then flow on to us and they won't actually be able to deliver the full electric fleet. What we have been working on though is that because we're developing this heavy electric vehicle charging hub at the landfill, which while it's focused on landfill machinery, we are talking to Waste Management about can we bring forward the electrification of curbside trucks, and they then utilize that facility in the interim until that other facility is completed. So that's kind of what we're working through at the moment. Beyond that, I can't give you any more exact timelines at the moment, other than it'll be in the next sort of year. That's what we're aiming for.
Are they under any form of sort of contractual obligation or and I'm all about constructive relationships, but there was a pretty strong messaging given to our community that we'd be fully electrified by 2024, and we haven't met that. So is there any other levers that we have to try and make that happen sooner rather than later?
We have limited levers, so yes, that is one aspect that we probably, in hindsight, could have done better in terms of the contracting arrangement. Having said that, at the time, we were quite confident that we would be able to get there. Ultimately, we are not, but that's partly outside the control of the contractor. So it's not a, hey, you haven't delivered, and therefore we're now going to ping you. Whereas in this case, it's like, well, we know where they're at with their facility, so we can sort of see how there is a pathway to getting there, but it's going to be later than I want it. And in the meantime, hence why we're trying to focus on that EV charging hub. Is there a way around it in the meantime? From a contracting perspective, there are limited levers on that particular milestone.
Any final questions? No, that being the case, members, on page 6, we have 3 noting recommendations. I'm happy to move them. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Is there any debate? I then put the motion. All in favour say aye. Those against say no. I declare that carried. Thank you, Ian. We're now moving on to item 7 on page 11, the update on solid waste and waste minimisation matters. Welcome, Jeff, to the table. Take the report as read, Jeff. Is there anything that you wish to add or anything that's been new since you wrote the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, no. Other than just to highlight that a request from the last meeting was to provide some perspective on our contamination rates vis-a-vis other councils. And so that's in the report, just drawing your attention to that. And that we're sort of sitting smack bang in the middle of our peers, at least in the Wellington metropolitan area, and and sort of broadly in line with other TAs across the country.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from members? Councillor Brown.
Thank you. The trial of the extraction and processing of organics on the curbside, you're doing a trial and going to trial on how much waste is saved. And have you looked at, are you doing a comparison as well, this trial to other TLAs that have green waste within their green bins? Is this will you do a cost benefit analysis of that?
So the trial is proposed by Waste Management to shred all municipal waste, like curbside general waste collected in the Hutt, and to extract the organic fraction from it. So as far as we know, that's not been done in New Zealand. Yet, but it has been done in South Australia and in other parts of Australia. So we'll be doing a bit of research around the success of that method, comparing it to what we find with the trial here at Silverstream, and also broadly comparing it to FOGO collections, food and green collections, in terms of diversion rates from landfill. There's quite a few sort of parameters within to sort of measure, and we haven't yet had the kick-off meeting with Waste Management about the trial and scoping exactly what we're aiming to kind of record and capture in terms of results, so we can actually make those comparisons and have some really good evidence to inform decisions for council in the future.
Councillor Edwards, your question.
Thanks. I had a couple of questions around the contamination issue. The first one was around what sort of oversight we have as a council as to the accuracy of those contamination figures. And I see that a report has been done on these three councils. Was that an independent report? Was that someone independent looking at contamination rates?
Yeah, that was Morrison Lowe, who was effectively auditing the process at the recycling facility in terms of how they established contamination rates across the three councils.
Thanks, Jeff. And what is the cost to this council in terms of penalties of, I mean, it just seems report after report, the contamination rates are stubbornly high, which in my mind is a group of ratepayers kind of not taking on board some pretty simple messages. What is this costing fellow ratepayers each year?
There's a sort of range depending on exactly how high the contamination is, but it can go up to $30,000 a month when we're above 15%. Is that correct, June? Yeah, in sort of that ballpark. Yeah. Hence the desire to get it below 10% when we don't incur those penalties, but that's been a very tough target to meet over the last couple of years, as you are well aware.
Sure, and that leads to my third question. In an environment where councils, not able to fund things like science kits for schools and rates rebates for, some very important things, sister city funding and so on, $30,000 a month really aggravates me. So my question is, when do we draw a line in the sand and maybe have less of an approach on educating people? Because I say again, I think the recycling is a pretty simple thing to get your head around, and just get absolutely tough on this in terms of withdrawing bins from those who don't play ball.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's certainly something we're always talking about in terms of the next steps. I mean, there's sort of no limit to how aggressively you can go after the problem, but I suppose withdrawing bins is, in some sense, it's kind of complicated. People start playing games to keep their bins, and then you end up spending a lot of time and money and resources to actually enforce a very complicated or comprehensive bin removal scheme. There's also issues around, I suppose, the optics of removing a significant number of bins or entire areas or suburbs or streets of bins, which is a very blunt way of driving down these numbers. We know that Porirua, for example, has areas where they simply don't have recycling because of the contamination rates that come out of those streets. And so there's issues where, yeah, we need to be careful to balance those competing priorities, but I hear what you're saying, and we certainly are constantly looking at the issue. One of the latest ideas is to equip the trucks so that the bins, when they do need to be removed, can be removed by the pickup truck on site rather than by the bin inspectors, because we have a problem where people are not presenting their bins once they get stickered, to avoid them being confiscated effectively or any further sanction. So there's a bit of cat and mouse games going on as well, which even with the most comprehensive bin removal scheme, we'd still be up against that. But I take your point. It's not a good look, and it would be great if we could drop the contamination rates.
Can I ask one more question, if you don't mind, Josh, or comment, I guess. I hear what Jeff has said on the optics, and we would have to tread carefully. But another aspect of those optics, I don't know that it's terrifically well known that we will remove bins. I wonder whether we could, set some sort of deadline or set some sort of determination amongst ourselves that we're not going to put up with this ongoing, and, have some good publicity about bin removal and action where we have removed bins, in the hope of just getting people to realise it's not a small problem.
Yep, certainly. Well, we'll take that on board. That, I mean, we can go back and look at some more tighter controls on bin removals and ways in which we can make the scheme more effective. I mean, it's something that we are working on, but I take your point that if there's interest among the committee to see perhaps a more tight or heavy-handed approach to bin removals, then we can bring that as an option.
Thank you, Simon, for your questions. We've got three people now. First, Mayor Barry, Councillor Parkin, and Deputy Mayor Lewis, followed by Councillor Mitchell.
I suppose my comment would be, I think, on Councillor Edwards' points, which I have a lot of sympathy for. I think it, while it certainly sits operationally with the team and you have the ability to do that, we know how hypersensitive it could be out there. And I think what would probably be needed is some form of resolution from this committee and council to take a particular stance. And that's, I think, a debate we should probably have, whether that's today or another day. Just the question, what level of detail do we have? And I understand you not wanting to report individual houses and streets into our reports, of course. But what level of detail do we have from the bin inspectors and how that looks? As you say, in Porirua, they've got streets that they simply don't run recycling services to anymore. And I suppose, and I think you answered it with Councillor Edwards' question, just if you just go over again, that 16% is very close, that number is very close across all three councils. So is that audit done at the plant of what's coming in, and we all just happen to be right on that sort of 16-point-something%? Just seems very, very close, and I just wonder how much that comes down to the process versus other, varying factors.
Yeah, there is some variability. Ewan, do you want to speak to that, the specifics of that?
So Morrison loaded that piece of work, and that was done around about late last year. So that would have looked back at, say, the first year and a year and a half of the service. So the numbers probably will be a little bit different. And I was asking the same question at the time. How is it that the numbers seem reasonably close, given that actually this council, we probably have the most elaborate scoop testing regime. So we have, compared to some other councils, they have to do 16 scoop tests per month. So that basically means that pretty much every second day there is a scoop test done on some truck. For us, obviously they do more scoop tests for other areas as well. And that, when you average that out, it gives us a pretty good, it's pretty high confidence that we're pretty close to what the actual is. Obviously, it's not it's maybe not quite as representative as we would like it to be, but of course, the more testing you do, the more cost it is. I don't think there was a clear answer of why we're all sort of in around about 16%, given that we actually do a lot more education than perhaps some of the other councils. Probably would be interesting to do another repeat of this, given that, we're sort of about nearly a year on from, and we've had another year of education and we've had some refinements done to the bin removal process. So it may well be that the result is now different, but that would be something useful to test potentially, say, in the second half of this year, to look back and see how are we comparing now. But on the first question, if you just wouldn't mind repeating that.
Well, it was more of a statement.
Okay.
And so to clarify, I think, Mr. Mayor, that at this meeting, we shouldn't be looking at a harder line in a debate, but what we should be doing at a future meeting with some information from officers in your next report around what would that harder line look like and how would that be implemented based on the data that you do have already. And then we can debate the options before this committee. I think if we had that debate now, it would be more at a philosophical level than understanding what that would mean.
But just an addition here, additional supplementary statement around how granular the data is. So we do have this data down to the property level, obviously not in as a life status across the whole city, because we do about 6,000 to 7,000 bin inspections per month, and so it would take about at least 6 to 7 months to cover the whole city. So you kind of get a point in time where you have a particular area, you have a pretty good understanding of where things are at. But then when you look at the data across the city, you do get the odd outlier where, a lot of the areas are sort of below 10%, and then you get 2 or 3 that are 30, 40%. And then that, shifts the average. So we do have it down to the property level. We can go to street level and to suburb or by route rather than suburb, and the whole city. And we have done some targeted leaflet, flyer drops, those sort of things. So we try to, horses for courses, try to adjust how we target those areas or particular properties.
Thank you, Ian. Did it follow up?
I was just going to say that was the question around the level of detail and the targeting. So I think that in my mind, there's no point in citywide comms to areas which have 5% contamination rates. So we really need to be targeting those areas where we've got issues. And I would say also, if it's costing us $30,000 a month in penalties, feels like, well, it's a pretty good investment to do as much as we can in the medium term to try and get that number down. So even if it costs us more through testing and what we're doing, and it's hopefully that will pay off in the long run. But I know it's a difficult one as well. So yeah, I'll pass on those other questions.
Thank you. We're going Councillor Parkin, Deputy Mayor Lewis, Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. My question was about that level of granularity that we have in the data and how much detail we have in terms of knowing that it's one street or one area or one property, or and then it raises the question as to whether or not, even if we don't take away the bins, is it worth targeting that property inspection? And when we do those bin inspections, do we then empty the bins, or do they still get mixed into the contamination, even if we know it's a contaminated bin?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Yeah, sometimes that still happens. I mean, it's there's elements to the scheme that still need refining, I think, in terms of fixing that problem. We've still got issues around RFID tags, which would, if we had a really good method of getting them on the arm of the bin to prevent loads going into the truck that we don't want to go into the truck. That would be ideal, and we're still working on that, and we're aware in the Hawke's Bay that there's an operator that's got that working really well. So yeah, there's certainly a number of issues that we can address by becoming more focused in terms of our attention, rather than the broad comms and engagement campaigns that we've been doing, which I think are also important to just shift the dial a little bit, but they're quite expensive. And obviously, like targeting the sources of contamination, and preventing that getting into the loads is the most the key kind of thing to do here.
Deputy Mayor Lawes.
Thank you. You've noted the 3 councils and their ratings are so close to contamination levels, and the rest of the country you've said is similar in what they're dealing with. What about the rest of the country for their ideas and how they're actually approaching it? Is it any different from how we're going? Are they doing the same thing? I heard.
Yes, yes, other people remove bins. I mean, some people, I know that some councils have, depends on how it's sorted, how it's measured, what the testing regime is, how they assess contamination, where it's assessed, so there is a bit of variability in sort of establishing exactly, apples with apples really in terms of contamination rates. But yeah, as I said, there are operators who are ahead of the game, I guess, like just referenced in Hawke's Bay, in terms of getting some of these interventions in place that will help in terms of targeting contaminated loads and preventing them coming into the plant.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I just had a question about proposed new FOGO service, and it's noted in here, the LTP consultation, a fairly low level of support for a FOGO service. Lots of people were talking about how they didn't need it and they feel like they should be able to opt in or opt out rather. And there's a mention here that officers will conduct further research on the benefits and drawbacks of an opt-in, opt-out approach. I was just curious, and I know this is all subject to change, whether what officers' understanding is of the current requirement through MFE, and the language on their website's pretty ambiguous. Sometimes it talks about food scrap collections being available to households, which kind of sounds to me like there is a service if you want one. But, on another page of their website, it says that all households will have a service. So I'm just kind of curious what your understanding is, whether the way it's currently proposed, an opt-out service is even an option in terms of the government's requirement.
Yeah, so MFE so that's part of the waste strategy is to do this. So the current government has not touched the previous government's waste strategy. Neither have they actually gazetted the requirement to collect food and organics from curbside by 2030, so they haven't followed through with that. Yeah, I mean, whether they do that or not, well, you can make your own speculations. But yeah, so yes, you're right. It is a little bit ambiguous. There's not currently any central government requirement to collect food and organics in curbside collections. So yes, but it is still, as far as I understand it, part of the waste strategy.
And is your understanding of that waste strategy that opt-out is an option for a service, or that all households should have that service? It kind of depends on.
Ewan?
Well, I don't think that would be something I think the government would have to be a bit more clear on, or MFE. My view is that I don't think the intention was for them to set a target and then have it basically diluted by the ability to opt out. What I would say is that, and I don't want to foretell what research and advice we will come back to you on this particular question, but in principle, if you have an opt-in, so where physically someone has to opt in and ask for a service, it seems very likely that you're going to get pretty low take-up, because unless people are motivated to pick up the service, they won't want to do that. So ultimately, the cost of providing the service on a weekly basis across the city would have to be shared across a reasonably small population, taking it up. So the cost per household would be reasonably high. On an opt-out, with an opt-out approach where you get it by default unless you physically take an action to opt out of it, you probably get a much higher uptake, but it probably won't be anywhere near close to 100%. Again, the costs would be higher than if you share it out across all households. So I think there's going to be a trade-off between, yes, it caters for some people that might want to manage it completely on their own, and therefore they don't incur the cost, but then the cost for everyone else will be higher. Yet the benefits of the service will accrue to the whole city. So there is, similar to the last curbside review we did 3 or 4 years ago, it's balancing different objectives and and confirming which one's more important to you. I mean, what I would say though is that FOGO, quite a number of councils either in New Zealand either have a FOGO or a food only collection. Looking across the ditch in Australia, there is quite a significant number of especially metropolitan councils have FOGO or a food collection, much larger, in terms of much larger numbers than in New Zealand. So it's a well-established service, and the questions around, if I have a compost, should I be able to opt out? I mean, I'm pretty sure they will have been traversed before by many other councils. And it seems interesting to me that ultimately they all rolled out the service. So there are clearly some benefits that outweigh the individual drawbacks that one might get by having a service that they don't feel they need.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, so I was going to ask another question about, you're doing a trial with Kāinga Ora, and some education program around that. But since this discussion, we've talked about this quite a lot, and we sensitively hinder around that this is essentially a rich and poor issue. So if we're going to have carrot and stick processes, the targeting and the incentivising people to recycle will go back to further issues around the families that are struggling or are not recycling or are in those areas. And sometimes it's more layered, like they've got small rubbish bins. People have told me they get tiny rubbish bins because they're renting. So they're going to put all their stuff in the recycling. So I don't think it's as straightforward as carrot stick take away, because what will happen is we will be taking them away from streets that are just going to be reflective of social issues. So you're trialling Kāinga Ora. Could that be part of the Kāinga Ora trial, that you try and do things to, consider different options? Maybe bring in climate or bring in the schools, or just put the target where the streets are struggling most, but what's the incentivisation for those streets?
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point, and it's exactly to what we were saying before in terms of, you can be very heavy-handed on with your approach, but you will have some collateral damage, and it's not, in my opinion, appropriate to just blacklist whole streets or whole neighbourhoods for exactly this reason. So, trying to get a little bit more targeted education in there to these communities, trying to work closely with Kāinga Ora to actually bring up the recycling performance, and just acknowledge that, some, like you say, some whānau are struggling and recycling well is the last thing on their minds. So just doing what we can to work in that space appropriately and considerately, just recognising those issues.
With the reference here to the Kāinga Ora was in particular to the multi-unit dwellings. So all Kāinga Ora properties, when they're like residential single-storey houses, they all have recycling bins unless they've been withdrawn for other reasons. But the particular trial that we're looking at is to in more targeted way engage with multi-unit dwelling or apartment dwellers. And that's because the setup that they have is quite different, because the recycling bins are shared. So we've recently developed some more specific guidance for people living in apartments. So their booklet that they get looks a little bit different to what a standard collection household would get. And so that little trial is really about, can we get maybe the building manager on site and then the residents on site and actually talk them through it, rather than just send out a flyer and then expect them to read it and then it doesn't work. So it's a little bit more of an active engagement approach compared to the standard household out there.
Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora, just heading back to the FOGO and just intrigued, and obviously we don't have some of this information because we haven't chosen a particular type of FOGO, but how resilient is it to the contamination is the process? And then have you looked at, or have we thought about the contamination rate and the effect on whether or not we have that opt-in, opt-out, or everybody's included? Does that change? Because obviously we're seeing some of that contamination of the recycling potentially because the bins are physically there, and if the bins weren't there, then potentially you wouldn't have that contamination.
Yeah. Look, it's going to be an issue. It's something that's already been quite a topic of discussion within the procurement for the processing facility. Is like, what level of contamination can the facility tolerate, or can where will we set that at? What will the processing options be in relation to contamination rates? And I mean, it's going to be something that we're going to have to work on. We're going to be in some ways back to square one in terms of rolling out recycling bins and trying to manage contamination rates in that service. So yeah, it's a live issue, and I guess the research will hopefully throw up some good information for us to base some decisions on and set some metrics around. Yeah.
Thank you, members, for the questions, and officers for the responses. I think it's been really helpful. What we're going to do is Judy's going to add up our recommendations on the screens. So I've got a second new recommendation there. Request officers develop a business case for options that could be implemented to reduce contamination levels of curbside recycling, with the intention that at our next meeting we can have that debate around what options we would like to consider, and the costs alongside them as well, noting that we are paying extreme costs, $30,000 every month with the current contamination levels. So anything that we're doing to reduce that would hopefully have a net positive financial impact. So I'm happy to move those two recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Question, Mayor Barry.
Just want to check business case. I don't think we need that in the sense of a huge, massive piece of work, but in the sense of more of a, I would have thought, sort of the information we have, a bit of a desktop exercise rather than.
Correct, and so I think the scope of that of being more of a cost-benefit analysis of different options, and also the impact socially as well, not just financially. And so I think the wording business case is appropriate for there, but noting the officers, the scope to be appropriate for this committee. Happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. Is there any discussion? Mayor Barry.
The reason I asked that question, that clarification, is because yes, we do need the information, but ultimately, I think we kind of instinctively know that this is sort of some political direction on this issue. So I wouldn't want us to like try and want too much information. I think the view is we either go, you know, there's probably a few different options, but you either go firm on those who are contaminating their bins, or you take different approaches, as Councillor Brown has outlined. So I just wouldn't want us to get tied in knots on that, because I think just ultimately we need to give some direction.
Thank you. Any further comment?
Just following up Mayor Barry's comments, yes, that's why I want the information. I want to see what the options are, and potentially there's things that the committee hasn't thought about. Maybe there are some useful solutions that other cities already have come up with that will significantly reduce our contamination rate and not cost the same amount as what we're paying.
What I would say though is from my experience of issues which are somewhat political in nature, often you'll get to a point where you'll feel like you've never got enough information to make a decision because it's tricky. So what I'm saying is that we just need to be mindful of that as we navigate it.
Thank you both for your comments. Again, I can see nods from officers, and I've had a quick side conversation here with Alison as well. And I think that the scope is acknowledged for us to give a bit more information I won't answer all of the questions. However, we'll be hopefully in a space at the next committee meeting to give some direction. And that may be to take further action or implement some of the recommendations that officers have provided us with. Is there any further comment? I'll then put the recommendations. All in favour say aye. Those opposing say no. I declare that carried. We're now moving on to item 8, the Climate Change Sustainability Committee Forward Programme on page 17. Are there any questions? No? Fantastic. I move that it's the Forward Programme is noted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Item 9, I've received no questions before the meeting. Moving on to closing formalities, our karakia whakamutunga. Thank you, Judy, for putting it on the screen. Please all feel free to join in. Unu hia, unu hia. Unu hia I te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa I te arataka tū. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakahiria ake ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea, hau, pai marere. I declare the meeting closed at 2:58 p.m. Thank you, everyone.